We've got about 44 people on here right now. It's noon, and welcome to I guess this is our second edition of virtual RocGrowth Candids. I'm Chris Cooley, local entrepreneur, supporter of RocGrowth, and MC extraordinaire if you've been to any of our other events. So I'm just going to keep that role here today, and want to welcome Adam Bello for joining us. This is a pretty special and exclusive event that we've been able to put together. So really appreciate him taking the time. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Candid style format, it's interview. So Richard Glazer is here, and he is going to be having an open dialogue with Adam. And we're going to do about 30 minutes of that, and then we will have a Q&A. So if you have questions that come up during the conversation, please put them. There's a Q&A section of the webinar. Please put them there. There's also a chat section, which is where your back and forth chatter can happen. So that's just more informal. We do have a member of our team, Tom, who's here. He will be monitoring. So I do want to say, if you have a comment that you want to put in the chat, please just select that goes to everyone, and we'll be able to see the comments. And like I said, if you have a question, there's a separate sort of poll for that. Otherwise, we're going to keep things moving pretty smoothly. There was a comment that came up last time. I can't see myself on the video. Well, that's because this is a webinar format. You won't see yourself. So we want to keep the focus on the two panelists here. And yeah, there's RocGrowth Coffee, which we can talk about at the end of this, which is more visual and, what do you call it, Richard? Hollywood Squares. I call it Brady Bunch tiles. It is what it is.
On your age.
Today, the Hollywood Squares are two people. And I'm actually going to tap out here in a second, but please feel free to put comments. I'll be watching that. In the meantime, I'm going to let you two guys take the floor. So have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone, first of all, is safe and healthy. We're 3 months into this, and it's a great honor and privilege to host an individual who has probably contributed more to our safety over the last 3 months than any single person in our community. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with RocGrowth, it's community. It's the community of Rochester's innovators and entrepreneurs. We have 2,200 participants, members, if you will. We have a social media following that exceeds 1,100. We've been around 6 years and have hosted monthly events in the flesh, where we appreciate how we instigate creative collisions, contacts between people who, if they don't know each other, perhaps should, and help build community. We're about empowering the new Rochester. This is a wonderful moment to be discussing that topic, given all the exigencies of the moment. We also like featuring our community's great innovators and entrepreneurs. Our website has a wonderful archive of recorded fireside chat style interviews, of which this is categorized. And then we have our coffee events with shorter presentations, and those are all posted. And we have a wonderful archive that goes long shelf life, and if you have time, you can listen as podcasts or watch them. And they're on our website. Everything we do too, and I think this is quite important to emphasize, particularly now, is informed by promoting greater equality of race, class, gender, and age. So I know Adam. I've known you as a candidate, and I won't hide the fact that I was a supporter of yours. But I'm not going to go gentle with you on this, because these are difficult times.
They are.
No one contemporary participating has experienced a crisis that on this scale of healthcare, public health, economic, and social, political, and some would say leadership too, on a national level. So welcome.
Thank you.
Less than 100 days into administration, when I think you were still 39, right?
Yes, I was.
That you technically are a millennial, and you represented already significant change by entering office when you did. less than 100 days. We talked about this once, and I must, full disclosure, we talked about this at the peaceful protest prior to the looting where you and both Representative Morelli attended. It was March 12th. You learned of the first COVID fatality, I believe?
That's right. Our first positive case was back on March 12th.
So
Yeah.
you went to your shelf and you found a playbook, right?
That's right. Well, I wish. No, this is that's a really interesting way for you to open this up. And Richard, let me first thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue with you and with all of the viewers and listeners today who are here with us today. And you're right, this has been really an incredible experience, a learning experience. And there is no playbook for any of this. There was, like you said, I think it was March 12th. Was when we learned of our first case of coronavirus in Monroe County. It was probably here before that. We just hadn't found it yet. And so we had weeks of preparations and meetings and conferences with school officials, town officials, things like that. But it really has taken on, it was not really part of the calculus as I was running for this office. As we had those conversations last year, never was global pandemic part of the equation. And so, we've been dealing with a lot of challenges here over the last several months, and there's really no playbook for it. In many ways, it's the old cliche, you're building the plane as you fly it. And that's really what we've been doing here. But, the other piece of it is, as a new county executive, trying to do that, I wasn't unique in that situation. When I talked to my colleagues across the state and other county executives, nobody's gone through something like this. So the real learning curve was in understanding the full breadth and scope of county government and how we can impact in a positive way the health conditions, social conditions, and economic conditions of people's lives. And I just have a fantastic team here that we all work together and try to bring people together. And that's going to be a theme that I think we talk a lot about today, is tearing down silos and bringing people together to work together and figure out new ways of collaboration and building partnerships, as opposed to everyone working, alongside each other, but not necessarily with each other. And that was the overarching theme of why I wanted to be here, and what I thought was lacking in government. I think it lacks a lot of times in government, but also across industries and sectors.
Good. I attended your inauguration, and you did something quite remarkable there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I am. Are you talking about the seating arrangement, the seating chart?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was important to me. What Richard is talking about is the fact that there was one group of people I had a seating arrangement for, and it was our county legislature, and I had them ask them to sit alternating Democrat Republican during the ceremony, and it was a symbolic choice to make, to demonstrate that we shouldn't be separated by an aisle and working past each other, but we really need to work together and operate as a team. And I thought that was an important symbol for the community, and I thought it was an important way to kick off my administration here, was to show that this really can't be about politics anymore. Because if it is, all we really do is just spin our wheels. We have to start to break down those silos and start working together, particularly because the issues that really defined the campaign last year, but are defining my administration are, we talked a lot about the opioid crisis. We talk a lot about economic development and job growth, and how we can really grow as a region and take advantage of all the assets that we have and the foundation that we have here. We talked about early intervention services for young children and families in our community. And so, those aren't partisan issues. There really aren't Republican, Democrat ways to look at workforce development programs. There isn't a Democratic or Republican way, or there shouldn't be, of dealing with the opioid crisis, which is another pandemic that's impacting our community. You might have philosophical disagreements, but you're never going to get through this unless you work together. The other interesting aspect of it is that for the first time in probably 30 years, most of my life, we have a divided government in the county. So you have a Democratic county executive, but you have a county legislature led by the Republican caucus. So by that very nature, we have to figure out how to work together, or else we'll get nothing done. And the last thing, I'm all about getting things done. I don't really care about credit. I don't really care about announcing programs because they sound good or they have a good sounding title in a press release. What my interest is, how do we move the needle? So I always look at metrics like, if we're going to talk about economic development, what is the job growth numbers? Don't just tell me the program name. I want to know, how are we moving forward? How are we moving that needle? Same thing with opioids or early intervention programs, or really a myriad of things. Anything we're talking about, it's really about how do we move the needle, and you can't do it unless you work together. And it's not just in government though. It's across industries. I find that a lot. We have a reputation here sometimes, which probably exists in other places, but in Rochester particularly, one thing that has been frustrating to me over the last 10 or 15 years or so is that we have a lot of times operate in silos. You have competing. We have over 100 nonprofits all doing great work here, cooperating very well, but not always collaborating very well. We have governments from the county government, town government, city government, state, federal government. Our leaders don't always work well together. We have two fantastic hospital systems, Rochester Regional Health. We have URMC. They're competitors, but guess what? In the pandemic that we're finding ourselves in today, they're working together and collaborating. And that's what's keeping our community healthy right now. And so really, what this was about, in the way I view county government is the convener. We are the one entity that sits at the center that can bring people together to help solve problems. And whether it's in the social service field, economic development realm, or even public health, we can bring people together. We don't always have all the answers. Richard, I'm always the first one to tell you, I don't know everything about everything, right? But what I try to do is find people who do. And listen to them and try to put them around the same table, because we all have the same goal. And I think that if you can identify people that have that same goal and put them around the table, we can find solutions.
Your early appointments, and I know several of them, demonstrate a very different approach. I would say there are some individuals who I've described as boomerangers. People have gone off, got fine educations in other cities, and have returned with a great appreciation for what Rochester has to offer. So, but then you had this crisis and everything is in such turmoil. I will point out that, you do deserve credit, all of you, because I know, as you said, you didn't do it single-handedly, for getting our region to be among the first regions to begin the reopening process in accordance with the state strictures. And you highlight our healthcare system, which, Buffalo, for whatever reason, lagged. And we had these wonderful assets. And, I commend you for that. But what we've also seen, we've revealed some of our great weaknesses. And perhaps we want to talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and it has, Richard, and that's something interesting. It didn't, I think of it like this: it's created problems that didn't exist before, but what COVID-19 has really done is exacerbated a number of problems that were pre-existing. You look at the racial disparities of health in our community. You look at the economic divides in our community. It's really had it has exacerbated those problems and really has made it now so that we have to double down our focus on that. And we've done it. I think, what we've done then is to bring together different groups that are working in those fields. So with the hospital systems, bringing the hospital systems together along with Jordan Health, Trillium Health, Common Ground Health, and bringing those collaborations with the city of Rochester together. With our economic development departments, we've been working very hard with GRE and the Chamber of Commerce and the new group ROC 2025, which we could talk about, which really, if you bring people together who are really used to be sort of working next to each other, but force the collaboration, it can be helpful. And because of those collaborations, I think that is why we were part of phase one in the reopening. Um, you know, I don't believe it was just a random by chance we were the first one announced to be able to be open. I remember the governor was here. I was at his event where he announced that we were going to go into phase one. And I think we went into phase one first for a few reasons. The first is that we have incredible participation from the community. They take it seriously. So you see the masking efforts, social distancing efforts, and people following the guidelines that our public health professionals. Dr. Mendoza is a great asset to this community and this government, and we're being led by science, and so there's a lot of participation. And we also have a great healthcare system, and by bringing these collaborations together, by having the two hospital systems, when the crisis first started, we developed a daily a Zoom session with both systems together at the same table, talking about what are they doing, how are they phasing up, how are they getting. We had a lot of conversation. You think back, it feels like it was 10 years ago, but it was 2 months ago. We were having those conversations about how do you build capacity within your hospitals, right? Those were all that was all generated through these daily meetings that we had in collaborating. And so we had to set a community goal. How do we get the goal for the hospital beds? And then how do we phase up to meet that goal? The nonprofit community came together through a new systems integration effort, which is a real innovative tool, which I'd love to talk to you today if we have a few minutes. About taking those 100 nonprofit organizations, well over 100, and bringing them together, the leadership together, so that instead of competing for resources, we're helping people, bringing that together. FoodLink was a big part of that, the United Way. And so you have that collaboration going. The school districts were all collaborating. I was on phone calls, Zoom sessions with the school superintendents right off the bat. That's how our schools got closed right away, ahead of any of the other counties by a couple days, because we saw the spread of the disease in the schools and wanted to stop for a second, figure out what was going on. And our schools closed relatively early. But those were all collaborations in that space as well. And then every day we started a phone call with our local elected officials. Every day at 2:00, I had a call with, now we're down to 2 or 3 days a week, but it was every day a week. We had a phone call with every elected official in Monroe County. There's town board members, county legislators, town supervisors, the mayor, state officials, federal officials. Every day I hosted a phone call where I gave updates to everyone about what was going on, what do we need to know new, and then we took questions and then went and found the answers and got back to people. And it was a great collaboration, so that so we're all on the same page. And that didn't happen in communities around the state and the country. And so by taking those collaborations and making them happen every day, I think that had a positive impact on our outcome, and it got us to where we are today, which is that it was just announced a few minutes ago that we're moving into phase 3. We were the first one to be announced into phase 1. And so I think it's worked. Our numbers are relatively low. But now we also have to turn now into figuring out, how do we come out of this? What's the short-term, long-term? How do we get people back to work? I'm very concerned about a number of industries here, particularly around hospitality industry. It'll be interesting to see how things play out with even remote working, people working from home, and companies adapting and finding innovative ways to have their employees work remotely and not have to come in. That may change the landscape on commercial real estate throughout the county. And so there's a lot of interesting things that are going to come as a result from this. But we've created job portals. We did things like that. So I don't think it's an accident that it was going well. It's because we had buy-in from so many different groups and organizations that aren't necessarily used to collaborating to the degree that they were.
Great. I want to remind all the participants, of which there are now 91, that if they have a question, please post it in the Q&A, Q&A feature, and I will do my best to sort through them and ask Adam. I intend to keep our discussion going for another 10 minutes, perhaps, and then lead into the Q&A. So I participated on a very interesting Zoom call last night with some of the organizers of the protest, and they are almost textbook radicals, and it's refreshing. You know, we all need to continue being respectful, as you know you've shown to your opponents, political opponents in the legislature. Listen to both sides, and they had a term called the nonprofit industrial complex. And as you're discussing all these 100 agencies, I suspect they have similar gripes, many of them, as I know individuals in the art community, myself and others who are entrepreneurs and try to promote economic development, that there's a small group of people that have traditionally felt entitled to run the show.
Mhm, mhm.
And that's part of the reason why I appreciated the change as of January 1st
Yeah,
in the area, and I saw it unfolding. Um, you know, let's talk about that for a moment,
yeah,
um, and how we empower and hear the voices. And I know people oftentimes, if they feel heard, they don't have to get exactly what they want, but
right.
they're willing to play along and participate and contribute. How?
Sure.
Mhm.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Richard. You're right. We do need to listen, and we need to be respectful to opinions that are new, and people you don't know. That's actually something interesting about me coming into this job. You know, I'm relatively new on the county-wide scene. I was a county clerk before this, but it was an opportunity to build relationships with people I didn't know. And I go back to an old saying, which is that nobody had, in my view, nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. No one person. So we should be listening to everyone. That's why I put together, when we transitioned here, a transition team. There were, oh my goodness, probably almost 100 people that contributed to a transition report. Many of those people I'd never met before, until we hit that transition point. And the reason why I wanted to hear from them is because I'm interested in hearing about people who know how to get something done. And sometimes you have to listen to other ideas. You know, you talk about the protest organizers. Last Friday, there was a protest in front of my office, in front of the county office building, and I think there was probably about 1,000 people came, and I went, and I sat on Main Street for the moment of silence, and I participated for about an hour because, in my view, there was 1,000 people came to my office with a message that they wanted to deliver, and I wanted to hear the message. And I thought it was my responsibility as a leader to be there. But it's also something I wanted to do. And I heard the message loud and clear. And so I thought that was great that they were out there, and that so many people came and participated to deliver that. And I understand, you know, part of the nonprofit industrial complex, which is something that I've never heard that term before. Um,
Neither had
but,
I.
but I get the sentiment behind that, and that's something that I try to break down. I'll give you an example of how we did this in a small space. It's not directly tied to to this piece of it, but back up to, you know, right before COVID-19 hit. I was looking at an issue related to daycare, for instance, and where our parents. There was an article in the Democrat Chronicle about, and the Children's Agenda came up with a report. We're in a daycare desert, and we don't have enough slots. And so what I did was, is we wanted to figure out, how are we spending our child daycare dollars? We get subsidy dollars from the state and federal government. The easy solution was to say, okay, well, let's just go to one group, you know, the group that wrote the report, the Children's Agenda, say, what do you want us to do? How do we spend these additional dollars? And then move on. What I said was, well, that only gets you one piece of it. If you're only talking to the one advocacy group, you're not talking to parents, you're not talking to daycare providers, you're not talking to your staff who's been here for years working on this issue. So you have to bring everybody together. So what we did was, we had I think it was around $2 million in additional funding, and we were underspending by some funding, and we clearly had a need. So we brought together daycare providers, parents, we brought the Children's Agenda, the a child care council. We brought everybody around the table and said, okay, we have additional dollars. We have parents who are in need, and we have, and we're in a daycare desert. How do we spend the dollars? Not not just to spend them, but how do we spend it? And then how do we impact more families, or how do we impact more children? What's the best way forward? And then we piece together a plan. Those groups, I don't believe, had ever really been around a conference table in the county executive's office before. Instead, it was really just the leadership management team here making those decisions. What sounds good? What do we think will work? And then do it, instead of actually meeting with people who are going to be impacted by those dollars.
Yeah, I want to shout out to Scott Root, who's participating, and he is one of these remarkable individuals that is under-recognized, hopefully one of the emerging leaders. He has a significant IT role at Wegmans and was the force behind what ended up being the canceled hackathon that Wegmans was producing. And they were going all out, and the theme was about Rochester and helping Rochester, not helping Wegmans. And he's making a point with his question that I'm aware of as being an issue in other communities. And I often find we forget that there's a big world outside. Rochester's just a small city, and many of our challenges, we could benchmark or borrow or steal ideas. There's no proprietary nature to these things. But an issue around messaging that Rochester is a great place to do remote work. And I believe in Tulsa, I'm not sure, it might be the Kaiser Foundation or help fund it, and they provide $15K as long as you stay for a year in Tulsa as a remote worker. But we're sort of shifting into economic development, and
Yep.
and I know you've been up to your eyeballs in the pandemic until now. Are you having, if you want to express some of your ideas on economic development, how to collaborate with others, foundations, big companies bring in, I know you've had some significant entrepreneurial support in your campaign. Yes,
100%.
let's start going down that path, please.
Sure. I mean, no, we have incredible strengths here. And I think that one of the problems just in general, on a broad view, and then we'll drill down, is that sometimes I think we're too down on ourselves in Rochester. I hear a lot of times when we talk about ourselves as a community, we a lot of times talk about our failures, right? We talk about things like the fast ferry. We'll talk about, the good old days when Midtown mall was bustling and there was shopping here on Main Street, or you hear about those things, or what's happening at Parcel 5. Is it this, is it that? Are we building a new auditorium center? What are we building here? And I think we're looking at it wrong. We are one of the greatest places to set up a business or raise a family. I mean, we're right in the Finger Lakes region, right on Lake Ontario. We have 19 colleges and universities, first-class colleges and universities that serve our region. We have a relatively low cost of living here with a very high quality of life. We have fantastic, amazing school districts here. And we have a lot of things to do, from the museums, the Museum of Play, the RMSC, you've got the zoo, the Red Wings, Searies Amusement Park. I mean, the list goes on. I have two small kids myself. They're 9 and 11. I wouldn't choose to live anyplace else. We're a fantastic place. So we have to start from there. We have great strengths in information technology, optics, manufacturing, healthcare, particularly with the University of Rochester here. We have a lot of strengths and a lot of foundation here, and there's a lot of talent coming out of our colleges and universities. And so, one of the things that we have to challenge ourselves with is, how do you take those thought leaders who are coming out of academia, those entrepreneurs who are coming out of the universities, and help them be able to commercialize what they want to do, right? How do we help them start their business and start here and stay here, because we do have that talent pool that exists. So if you're thinking about incubators, like NextCorp is a good example that's down here that the county plays a role in, that has the collaborative space, it has the support that it gives innovators and entrepreneurs who are coming out of the universities. It gives them that space and those tools to be able to collaborate. And so I think, we should, having investments in those types of collaborations is going to be important. You talk about remote working from home. Something we try to help offer small businesses in the community. About a few weeks into the pandemic, Comida, working with Anna Liss, who's my director of economic development and planning, came up. They did a grant program to small businesses. It was a $10,000 grant program for working capital. So it could help businesses if they needed to purchase supplies or equipment to be able to allow their employees to work from home. It could also have been paid for rent, things like that. It was fairly broad in how business could do it, but it helped to sustain through the pandemic, but also be able to uh, 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 adapt to the changing needs. And I think I said it was a grant program, it was a loan program, it was a $10,000 loan program with a 0% interest though, so that and paid off over a lengthy period of time, so that it can really, we think, be helpful in companies being sustainable here.
And I will share with you, we promoted that the
Yeah.
week it was introduced through to our
Thank
community.
And it was widely made available. I mean, widely utilized, and I appreciate you doing that. The other prong to this, though, is that one thing that's frustrated me in the past, and something that we are going to be working on now, is also in relation to job training and job development. We have job training programs. Are good, but you have to think of them more as career training programs, and they have to be tied to jobs that are available. So we have coming up online a huge project here. The Finger Lakes Workforce Development program is here. We're working through MCC. There was the Ladders Up program that the county has that we're taking a hard look at, to make sure that as we put people through and start investing resources into job training programs, it's connected to a job. Right? There has to be an available job that's being trained for. Otherwise, you're just training people, and then they go back home. Then you're not progressing. And so we have to really draw that collaboration between business that has jobs available and the training programs and the people, so that there's a pipeline that we get people through. So we're not just training people for the sake of training people, but we're helping build careers and longevity.
Given these remarkable times, I'm going to deal with this issue a little more than perhaps previous periods, and I think it's appropriate. And it's around diversity and inclusion. I've often contended one of our great assets that remains underutilized in our community is that we do have diversity. It's not as abundant as my hometown in New York City, but we still, if you look at the data throughout the county, we have the healthy amount of diversity, but it's not evident in many circles. I've noticed that in your administration, there is more representation than the prior administration. I also like to point out to people, if I really want to feel somewhat cosmopolitan, there are only several places I go, and they include the public market, but also RIT and U of R. Those are places that draw widely from throughout the country, in fact, the world. And you see a lot of people of color. So I want to open up this issue because, I want to hear how, obviously county executive, you only have certain tools and your influence only goes so far. How are you
Sure.
adhering to this mission that you've expressed before of greater inclusion and diversity?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. First of all, I do think that the government should look like and represent the people that it serves, and in order to do that, you have to be intentional in your recruitment efforts, your hiring in your hiring efforts. And so we have made intentional decisions and efforts to make sure that our staff is inclusive and diverse. And I think that that's going to be helpful in terms of being able to serve the full population here. I mean, I have an operating principle that the government has to serve everyone, regardless of who you are, who you know. This is not about hiring just a person next to you or someone because they're helpful on a campaign. It has to be someone who can get the job done and move the needle, and understands the community they're serving. But the government has to work for everybody, not just who you are, who you know, where you live, what zip code you're in, the color of your skin, the God you pray to, or who you love. It has to work for everyone. In order to do that, you have to build a team that also looks like that community. And so we are working diligently on that. I've made a commitment, in my transition team report reflected that, to change the way that we work to diversify our team here through a chief diversity officer position, which is something we're working on right now. And so we'll have some news, a little more news to come on that in the next couple of weeks. But we're working very hard to do that. And it's also, I worked on this a lot when I was the county clerk as well. One of the issues that was apparent to me when I started, I went to every elected official, not all of them, but most elected officials in the city of Rochester, and said, how can a county clerk help you? And wasn't it wild that the largest municipality in the county, over 200,000 people, didn't even have access to something as simple as a DMV? So we worked hard and we built a DMV in the city, the first DMV in 20 years in the city of Rochester. But there was a whole population here that was not had, in my view, the same access to services that other areas of the county had. And so we need to make sure that that we're thinking of everyone as we make these decisions and how it impacts it. The coronavirus has the same, it's going to have that same effect. It's going to impact different communities in different ways, right? When we saw right at the beginning that communities of color were being impacted at a higher disproportionate rate, particularly what we were seeing early on was in hospitalization. So it was in the most severe cases. And so, we have to adapt to that and see that and look for it so we know how it's impacting different communities. So we went and had a collaboration with Trillium Health and the Jordan Health in the city of Rochester and our Department of Health to increase testing, but not just testing, but to create health clinics, respiratory health clinics, so that when people came in, they weren't just tested and sent home. There was more of a holistic approach to health, so that we can help people. We also formed a collaboration with the healthcare systems called RocCovid. It's our symptom tracker, which is very unique to Rochester and Monroe County, and I'm going to plug it right now. It's called rockcovid.org. So if you haven't gone to it and signed up, go to rockcovid.org. But it's a simple tool. It's very simple. Allows you to track every day your symptoms, whether or not you have a cough, a fever, things like that. You check in every day, and what it does is it allows the healthcare professionals, or you also tell if you have no symptoms, by the way. So you just say whether or not you have it. But what it does is it tells the healthcare professionals, where are we seeing spikes, so by zip code, so they can look in and see, okay, this zip code here, for some reason there's a spike here. Then it allows the public health professionals to dig down in and see if we can get into neighborhoods, figure out what the issue is, why do we think there's a spread, why are there symptoms in there. We can deploy testing to different neighborhoods in geographic locations. It also tracks gender, age, things like that. It's anonymous. You don't give it your name, you don't give it an address or anything like that, but it allows the public health to see the big picture by zip code, and we can start tracking and having more real-time efforts to impact that.
So I'm tracking the questions, and I think I need to highlight the fact that Adam is our county executive, and he has authority over certain agencies, appointing people. He cannot do certain things.
Okay.
And we will probe a couple of items in particular.
Sure.
It's clear you're one of the most influential figures in terms of public health, and you're addressing that now. You also, have responsibility over library system, the zoos, the airport, and all those. One topic is on several people's minds at the moment, and with good reason, and it's the issue of the police. And the county sheriff, I believe it's Baxter, is it the superintendent or commissioner of police, or the chief? He's the chief. He's an elected official, correct?
He is, yes, the sheriff's elected here. Yep.
So I think there's a lot of energy around this issue. Would you speak to your role with the county police? Being a city resident, I don't see him much except when I go to the county building.
Right. Well, so the county executive has in the county government, we have a public safety department that runs the probation department, conflict defender, those issues. We have an independent elected, or those departments. We have an independent elected sheriff, that is Todd Baxter. Every county in New York State has an elected sheriff. It's one of the constitutional positions. And so the sheriff will manage his budget and his personnel and staff, and then that's part of the overall county budget picture. I used to be a town supervisor though, in the town, so I don't manage the police force. That's the sheriff's responsibility with the deputies. I did used to be a town supervisor though, that did have a police department. Relations between law enforcement and the community are critical, and they're important that we build trust, because this our society is built on trust, a foundation of trust and collaboration, and we need to make sure that the community and law enforcement are working together. And clearly, when there's a breakdown in trust, and in that collaboration, we can't move forward. And so our sheriff has been, I think, very good at engaging the community. The Rochester City Police Chief, Laurent Singletary, I have a good relationship with, and we met frequently over the last several weeks. We've been on many calls together. And I know New York State has just passed a series of reforms, the Say Their Name agenda, which would, I think, go a long way. It repealed 50A related to police records, personnel records and complaints. It also outlawed chokeholds and things like that, things that frankly should have been done a long time ago. A lot of things in this agenda that helped to build that trust. When I was the town supervisor in Irondequoit, we spent a lot of time working with the community to do, we did anti-racism training programs within the police department, and really did redouble our efforts to try to add diversity amongst the ranks as well, because the police department as well has to reflect the community that it serves in order to build trust, and also to have a better understanding of the needs of the population that it serves.
I want to highlight, Irondequoit is one of the more diverse suburbs in our community. It probably shouldn't be a suburb, but that gets into our towns, villages, and how New York State works. But it is, you already, governed a fairly diverse community, right?
Oh yes, yeah. It was the town of Irondequoit's a very diverse community, and a lot of the suburbs are. And I think that's one of the strengths that, in my hometown, it's one of the strengths that we have is the diverse population there. We're diverse in all sorts of ways. Our race and ethnicity breakdown, but we also have a huge diversity in terms of economic a status as well. We have multi-million-dollar homes right up on the lake, all the way down to great starter homes. I bought my first starter house in Irondequoit, I think, for about $50,000, and has great school districts. So we have a myriad of folks there, but I think that's your strength, because if you're only surrounded by people who think like you, look like you, and it's all the same, you're not going to learn anything. You're never going to grow. You're never going to be able to understand how to empathize and look through the lens of other people and their backgrounds. And so I think that's a strength, our diversity, I believe, as a full community, not just in my town, but in the county, our diversity is a strength.
Your positivism is contagious and totally aligned with RocGrowth and our purpose. It's focusing on the assets and not the whining.
Right.
Uh,
And that's,
and,
yeah,
and I just wanted we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to focus on the assets because ultimately, how do we as a community get together, lock arms and do the work and
right.
move ourselves in the right direction? And I would be remiss if I omitted the arts, right, Adam?
Oh, no, we can't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
people, people often just assume it exists, and when I say the arts, it's from culinary, craft beer, all the way to the fine arts, painting, sculpture, architecture,
It's our
and
history too. It's who we are as a community. Yeah.
yeah. So I know, obviously, this has thrown a wrench into the potential opportunities in the first year, but let's discuss now that you're sort of catching your breath. How you
Sure.
intend to proceed? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And, everything is done. So I have you and I had a great conversation last year. And I believe this particularly around public art, and supporting our artists. I think there is a role for that, particularly, and it also aligns nicely with a lot of the other positive things that are happening. It is an economic development tool. And public art, I think, goes hand in hand with economic development, our quality of life, and particularly, I look at downtown. There was something very simple that happened last year that really caught my attention. Things as small, when there was the keyboard was painted in a crosswalk, right, over by the Eastman Theater.
Yeah,
That was great.
have some
And that's what I think where you and I
I
might have
wore the
first met.
shirt. I wore the shirt. It still has paint on it.
Is that right?
There were
You did a
70 other
great job.
people who did it. Don't worry.
You did a great job. And I loved
Sean,
it. That
Sean,
caught my attention. No, but that made that simple thing that you did, right? And painting that crosswalk makes it a neighborhood. It makes it something you want to come outside, you want to see it, you want to be there. It's, there's a new investment that the Rochester Museum, uh, uh, the
Strong.
Children's Museum.
Yeah.
Yes,
You
the
said
Strong Museum.
it.
Sorry, holy moly! I've spent many years of my life there with my kids, and the name just the Strong Museum of Play. So they have a very interesting outdoor public art display that will link that area and neighborhood right up to the river. And create that walkway, this investment in Rock the Riverway. These are the things that make being downtown, being in the city, much more attractive. It gives you a place to go and go outside. A couple of years ago, I met with a colleague who for coffee here at Starbucks, right at the Hyatt. He goes, Adam, one of the challenges is, I said, what? He goes, where is everybody? Right? There was just happened to be not a great day, so there's not a lot of people outside. But there weren't a ton of people outside. And it's like, there's a lot of potential here, right? When you build Rock the Riverway, you invest in public art, you start to invest in projects like that. It's going to make people, it's going to create that want and desire to be downtown, to grow downtown, to be downtown, and help the core here in the city. I think that, and I think it also has that community building piece to it as well, and brings people together. So I'm a huge fan of public art. One of the things that I'm disappointed in this year is, because of what happened with COVID-19, we miss out on things. The Jazz Festival was supposed to be happening, I think 2 weeks from now, I think right at the end of June. What happens with Fringe Festival, Jazz Festival, what happens with all those great gatherings. I look at, one of my favorite things to do is you go to the Cornhill Arts Festival, the Park Avenue Festival. I mean, we're a festival town. I love that about us. You can't go anyplace. You go to Park Avenue Festival, you have all this great artists coming from all over the region, and not even just from here, but from all over the Northeast. And there's hundreds of thousands of people out enjoying each other, enjoying the festival. And that's one of the big negative side effects of COVID-19. When you look at investments that the government can make, it's one place I do want to make additional investments. But again, the other consequence here where we are is the county's also facing a potential $50 million
Right.
budget deficit, and that, you know, you know, we're making cuts, and we've been able to find those kind of we've been able to find $50 million in spending reductions here at the county that isn't going to have, we've been able to do it in a way where it's not going to have too much of a negative consequence on programs and things that we've already made commitments to. But long term, this is going to be a challenge, particularly when a lot of the county's financing and funding of the arts and projects like that come from our hotel motel tax and opportunities like that. And that's one of the industries I'm really most concerned about, because our hotels are empty, right? I mean, the conferences, the convention center, it's all struggling right now. So we as a community are going to have to grapple with that, the consequences of that over the next several months. And we're going to have to redouble our efforts in the years to come to bring that back to life.
I'm confident in our community as long as we collaborate and express ourselves. And I will do some public lobbying for a moment.
Sure.
Public art, that's just one mode of art. There's so much here in this community, from music, and it's not just the Philharmonic or obvious. Artists don't always represent themselves very well because many are more private. So it's a role for a curator or an advocate such as myself, or as you know, Blue, who's a leader, shown leader. And there are a few others. Sorry if I'm omitting your name. I don't have the time to go through the list. So that's what lobbyists do, educate. Finally, I really feel this is important. I'm saving something for last, and it sort of synthesizes a bunch of issues. When I moved up here, lived in a suburb, and many of the individuals, and it's not that far, who are out in these ring suburbs do not recognize that many of the kids who attend the school district are not able to participate in online classes because they simply don't have sufficient broadband or access to the internet. Yet, as I think is becoming more widely known, there's a ring of fiber in the community. At this point in time, access to the internet is a utility, just like running water and electricity, and we don't treat it that way. It's a national issue, but I believe there are things that can be addressed locally, and so I want to raise that because I believe there are discussions within the county building around this.
There are, and there was a study that was done here a couple of years ago that we were just starting to dust off when the pandemic struck. I agree. Let me deal again high, and we'll drill down a little bit. Broad access to high-speed internet, broadband access is critical for a host of reasons. It's something that impacts the economic divide, educational divide. It really will impact every aspect, because it is like a utility at this. You have to have access to the internet, right? There's some communities around the country. Chattanooga, Tennessee, I think, is one of them that has like a very interesting, model where I think they have universal access to the internet. And this is another area where COVID-19, as you just mentioned about the educational divide, there's clearly an educational divide in our community. And again, that existed pre-COVID-19, but then COVID-19 exacerbated it, because now you have students who are learning from home and continuing learning, and then you have other students who are not, because they don't have the same access to computers, to the internet, and things like that. So there was a study a few years ago that the county undertook that would figure out how can we take that fiber network that essentially rings the county here. How do we take that network and make it available, and use that to make it available to residents and the business community as well? So we're going to take a look at that because I'm very interested in that. We have a number of county legislators. Howard Mafucci, Rachel Barnhart have been talking a lot about this in the county legislature last year. So this is something that's interesting to me. I'd love to hear more ideas that you have. But again, this is one of those interesting areas where the county, there was a study done and then it kind of went on a shelf for a little while. And I'm not sure why. So we're going to take a look at that because it's a network. The fiber network, the taxpayers also invested, right? The county invested a lot of money in this, and so we should get a return for those dollars.
Great. Again, a lot of communities are confronting these challenges. We're fortunate to have that asset, the ring, and there's new technology coming down the pike. It would be great to have some very intelligent approaches and eventually a solution to this. It could be very meaningful to Rochester and the way we project ourselves to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. And we have to be positive. Like, you said something about my positivity is contagious, but we have to start thinking about what our assets are and stop talking about like I said earlier, we think a lot about our failures and things that we didn't do quite right, but there's more going well here. We really do have great resources here. We just have to take advantage of them. And I do think that, especially with the colleges and universities, the U of R, RIT, churning out graduates here who are very smart. They're innovative in their thinking. We have to find ways to support them so that they stay here and realize that they can grow. And then the other just sort of piece of this that I want to be taking a look at, and you'll hear me talk a lot about over the next few years, is now this whole thought about remote working now. Right, you have companies, national companies. I think Twitter announced several weeks ago they're no longer going to make employees come in because they found their employees are just as productive at home as they would be if they came into an office setting. We had a number of county employees who were working from home and as we're as productive as ever. I did a fair amount of working from home. If you saw me on any of those, a lot of those broadcast shows, those town hall meetings we were doing on the news pretty regularly, that was my basement. And I think I was just as productive doing them from there as I am sitting in my office where I am right now. And so we're seeing that a lot, that people can do that. I know, like, even in the real estate market, they figured out how to do virtual house showings and house closings without even having to be together. And so I think you're going to see a lot more investment in remote working, things like that. I don't know about remote learning. You need the bricks and mortars and the school teachers. So we do need to get our kids back to school here at some point, and I'm anxious to see that happen and to do it in a safe way. But I think we're one of the things that the last several months has done is it's forced us to look more creatively at what we do to see if there's better ways to do things.
Cool. We're coming up to the top of the hour, the end of our hour. Since you are a millennial, you're going to need one of these stickers. I need
one
for your laptop, right? You have to have your laptop covered. No.
Yep.
But I want to, I need to highlight the role that several individuals play in our organization that keep it going. We're totally grassroots. In fact, maybe a few pennies were paid to Zoom to have this license, and that's it. A little money goes a long way. But Adriana Skura-Palmer is out there somewhere. Tom Myers, who I see has been adding to the chat and encouraging everyone, if not already, register at RocGrowth.com to receive notification of future events. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Justin Moore here is perhaps, if he was able to break away from work, participating. My great partner, Chris Cooley, is a community builder extraordinaire. Please post on social media, email info@rockgrowth.com with any thoughts, contributions, any resources you want to perhaps apply to the area. If we can't use them, I also want to give a shout out to Upstate Venture Connect, a nonprofit that hosted Adam on a wonderful call just a week ago. If you go to uvc.org or uvc.com, you'll see him alongside county executives in two of the counties that are home to Syracuse and Utica, Oneida, and Onondaga. And you realize there's a lot of competency, all three of you. Just acquitted yourself very well and showed that you're on top of running local government. So I'll bring Chris back on that note to say farewell. It's 12:59. We are great, man.
Wow.
Point.
We filled an hour.
Well, I just want to reiterate, Adam, thanks for being here. It's really refreshing. I put this in the post personally to hear from and have this sort of open dialogue, conversational access to people like yourself. And so appreciate that. I will say we almost topped off and capped out at 100. There were like 96 people here at one point. And yeah, the follow-up, this video is going to be on YouTube. So please feel free to share if anybody's out there. Sign up for the mailing list and stay tuned. I mean, Richard, we're moving on the fly here, right? So we're doing
it will be on our website within 12 hours.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
So, and next event, who knows what it's going to be? We don't even know yet. We'll talk about it next week as a team, right? So appreciate everything. And that's all I have to say.
Well, let me say thank you, Chris. Thank you, Richard, for the invitation to do this. Thank you to those 96 people who are watching. And the hour goes by really fast. But just remember, like I said, nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. So if there's something you see, something you think I should focus on or look at, never hesitate to reach out. I'm always looking for new creative ways of doing things and partnerships to be formed, especially as we go through. We never talked about the master plan process, but we'll be undergoing a master plan this year or last year. So we got to, or in the coming months. So we're going to be looking for a lot of input from the community.
One more. How do they do that?
What's that? They can go through. Yep. So you can reach out to me on any of our social media platforms. Give my office a call, 753-1000. You can also email us at countyexecutive@monroecounty.gov.
Super. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.